The biggest game of the weekend will be on ABC, 7:30 Eastern Time. The second-ranked Georgia Bulldogs travel to Tuscaloosa. We always love this matchup, right? It's good against good. The two best programs in the sport going at it on the field in the regular season. We don't see it very often. We usually see it in the postseason, whether it's the SEC title or even a national championship. This is a game that you just absolutely have to love. I mean, one team's won 6 titles since '09. Another team's won 2, but also got there in 2017. So it doesn't get any better than this. It's the best matchup in the sport. It's the most pros on the field, and it is going to be an incredible environment there in Tuscaloosa. Now, Georgia, they've lost 8 of their last 9 against Alabama. Kirby Smart's 1-5 against the Crimson Tide as the head coach, but they've only lost 2 games since the start of 21 season. Okay, 2 games lost, 2 national championships. I'd say that's pretty dang good. Now, we all know that Kirby is largely considered the best coach in the sport. This is his 9th year. He's 97-16. He's won 5 consecutive AP top 5 matchups as a head coach. This is one shy of the longest win streak in AP top 5 matchups by a head coach all time. Guess who was the guy? And this will be very exciting for many here. Lou Holtz currently holds the longest streak of wins against AP top 5 teams. That was at Notre Dame from 1988 to 1990. Nick Saban won 6 in a row from 17 to 18. So it's happened before. Kirby in victory will match the longest streak ever between top 5s. But that leads us to the first question here. Question number 1. How good is Kalen DeBoer? How good is he? Now, we've only seen him have 3 seasons in the Power 5. So it's not like we've seen this long, resume with track record and precedent. Like we a lot of us just don't know. Like, I think he's amazing. I'm going to be honest with you. I think he's amazing, but it's not like there's this long history of success in games like this. Now, in 2019, he was at Indiana, spent 2 seasons as Washington's head coach. Every year of his life outside of those 3 have been at relatively lower levels of football, including a couple of years as the head coach of Fresno State. But he's compiled a 107-12 win-loss record. He's won at least 10 games in 8 of his 9 seasons as a college head coach. At Washington, he was 25-3. And against AP-ranked opponents, he is 12-2. Those 12 wins were actually consecutive. Okay, so he won 12 straight games against AP opponents, but it is bookended by losses. He lost by 7 to a ranked Oregon team back in 2021, and he lost in the national championship game last year to the Michigan Wolverines. So we've seen him do more with less forever, but this is by far his biggest matchup with a team that is comparable in talent to the team that he's playing against. So he might have brought a knife to a gunfight last year against Michigan. This year, he is fully equipped to go toe-to-toe with what some believe is the best coach in college football. Question number 2. Can Georgia get Carson Beck back on track against a young secondary? It's not often when I've watched Carson Beck, just in the year and change that he's played, the 17 starts that he has. It's not often when I've watched him and I think, man, he left a bunch of plays on the field. Well, against both Kentucky and against Clemson, there were some big missed opportunities. And against Kentucky in particular, it kind of was like he was seeing ghost a little bit. Now, for those of you that are Georgia fans, and if you're Bama fans or if you're just fans of the sport, like, go back and watch that game. You can watch, YouTube and check it out. Just go back and watch the Kentucky game. There were receivers open quite a few times, by the way. He had Oscar Delp, decided to check it down to ETN. He had an in-breaking route that would have been a big play, decided to check it down or take off to his left-hand side. I think he was seeing some ghosts because Kentucky did a really good job of mixing up their coverages and playing some things that are a little bit unorthodox. So as a result, in the games against both Kentucky and Clemson, his average depth of target was 6.26. It's just not very far downfield. And I happen to believe that big plays are going to determine this game. So He's going to have to push it downfield more so than he did against the 2 Power 5 teams he's played so far. 9 of Alabama's 12 players in the secondary are either first-year players or transfers. Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator, has implemented a new system which relies a little bit more on zone coverage, a little bit more on disguise, and a little bit more on trying to fool the opposing quarterback and bait the opposing quarterback to throw into traffic. So can Carson Beck bounce back and get back on track against a relatively inexperienced secondary? That is question number 2. Question number 3. Can Alabama generate some pressure without blitzing? Carson Beck against Kentucky got hit on about a quarter of his plays. So he got hit, and he got hit hard. And I think those hits did have an impact on how he saw the field, and it had an impact on his command. Well, fast forward in the game just a little bit. Georgia's offensive line, Tate Ratledge, gets hurt in the game. And if you really look at Georgia's O-line, they have not been quite as stable as they've been in the past. They've had some whiffs. They're allowing pressure on just 18% of the dropbacks, which is the 4th best in the sport. So it's not like they're giving up tons of pressure, but when they have given up pressure, it's happened quickly. They have actually the 2nd worst time to first pressure at 2.34 seconds. The only one with a quicker first pressure is Kent State. And if you care about it, look at Kent State's schedule. It would make sense why their time is slower than Georgia's and pretty much anybody's else's. So Georgia's had some inconsistencies up front, and teams have been able to overload their protections a little bit this year with some pressures and some disguised pressures. Do you realize that Alabama has brought 5 or more pass rushers this year just 4 times? That's the fewest in the sport. The second fewest is Wake Forest with 9 blitzes this year. Alabama's blitz rate is 3.3%, and that's the lowest in the FBS by nearly 5 percentage points. So Alabama this year, and albeit early in the season, they have not been a team that's willing to, or not been a team that's needed to, ramp up the pressure by bringing extra defenders. Maybe that changes this year to kind of speed up the process for Carson Beck, because Carson Beck did not see the field very well the last time he was out there. Question number 4. Can Alabama continue to create big plays? Alabama averages about 11 explosive plays a game. 11% of their snaps offensively go for 20-plus yards. That's the 7th best rate in the sport. We know what Jalen Milroe wants to do. He wants to soften things up with the run game. He's been excellent in the run game this year, and I love how much this offensive staff is leaning in to allowing him to use that athleticism and the danger that comes every time you snap the ball and he's carrying it on the perimeter. So we know that he's also a guy, too, that wants to push it downfield. 29% of his throws travel 20-plus yards. That's the 2nd highest rate in the sport. So nobody throws it downfield with more regularity than Jalen Milroe. Nearly 1/3 of his throws travel way downfield. Now, Georgia's defense has allowed just 10 explosives this year. And by the way, in case you're new to the show, we define explosives as 10-plus yard runs and 20-plus yard passes. And Georgia's allowed just 10 this year. That's the 2nd fewest in the sport. They gave up 5 against Kentucky. And if you look at it, there was like 12-yard run, 13-yard run, 17-yard run. It's not like they gave up 60-yard runs. They gave up 4 against Tennessee Tech. And they gave up 1 against Clemson. So it's rare to create big plays against this defense. And Georgia's now gone 16 straight quarters without allowing a touchdown. That's the 3rd longest streak in the FBS in the past 20 seasons. Question number 5. Which team will force a key turnover? Now, Georgia has yet to turn the ball over this season. There's only a couple teams that can say that. Indiana and Louisville and Georgia. So 3 teams that have yet to turn the ball over. They forced 3, including a ridiculous interception by Malachi Starks in the opening week game against Clemson. Alabama's turned it over 4 times this year, including 3 times against USF. Some self-inflicted, some definitely created by the opposition. But they've also forced 4 turnovers. And you know what they've done on those forced turnovers? They've scored 28 points. So it doesn't get much better than that. 4 turnovers forced, 28 points scored off turnovers. That could be huge. And we all remember, too, last year, think back to the SEC championship turnover. Georgia had a turnover deep in their own end, and that ultimately might have been the difference. So a key mistake in this game might flip it on its head. So question 5, which team will force a key turnover? And then final question here. And I always wonder this in a game like this. How significant is home field advantage? Because I've looked at some of the biggest games this year, and whether it's Miami at Florida, Tennessee at Oklahoma, Texas at Michigan, we think back to some of the biggest games this year, and it hasn't been a huge issue for the road team. Just hasn't. Notre Dame at A&M. I mean, some of the biggest games, some of the most hostile environments, the road teams come out the victor. Well, that hasn't been the case in Tuscaloosa for a really long time. Since 2008, Alabama is 106-6 at home. 3 of those 6 losses came against Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel, and Joe Burrow. And Alabama's won 17 straight at home in conference play. Yes, they lost to Texas last year, but Texas was not in the SEC at that point. So there is a bit of a caveat to that 17-game win streak in the SEC. So that 17-game streak is tied with Georgia for the longest active streak in the FBS. So their last conference loss at home was against LSU in 2019. A couple trends in the game. Alabama is the first time being a regular season underdog since 2015 when they were a dog at Georgia. By the way, they won that game 38-10. Before that, Alabama had not been a regular season underdog since 2008. That was at Georgia as well, where they were a 6.5-point dog. They won that game 41-30, and they've won 3 straight regular season games as an underdog. Alabama has been favored in 90 consecutive home games. Last time they were a dog was 2007 against LSU. They lost by 7 as a 7-point dog. And then Georgia is 10-4 against the spread against top 5 teams over the last 10 years. That's the best in the FBS. I'm taking Alabama. And what I expect to be a high-scoring game. Tail of the tape, I look at Alabama's quarterback, Georgia's quarterback. I think it's pretty dang close. I really do. I look at the running back position. Trevor Etienne, Frazier, what you're getting at the running back spot from Alabama with Jam Miller, Justice Haynes. I think it's pretty dang close. Wide receivers, probably lean just ever so slightly towards Georgia because I think they have a little more depth at the position. But what I've seen from Ryan Williams, he might be the best guy in the game. Offensive line, I lean towards Bama. Defensive line, I lean slightly towards Georgia, assuming they're fully healthy. Linebacker, I lean towards Bama. I think Bama has really good players on the interior. While I think Georgia's also excellent, it's a slight edge, just a slight edge towards Alabama. And then the back end, I lean slightly towards Georgia, but I don't know if we know just yet about the Georgia secondary. I lean Bama. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I expect both offenses to play well, and I think it's going to come down to the wire.